March 16, 1857, the United States Supreme Court issued one of the most controversial rulings in American history. It was on that day that Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roger Taney, spoke on behalf of the majority of justices when he proclaimed African Americans to be property and not citizens of America. This decision sent shockwaves through our nation and dramatically increased tensions between pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces in the United States. It would eventually become one of several events that led to the American Civil War. Dred Scott was born in Southampton County, Virginia in 1795. The exact date of his birth is unknown. His birth name was actually Sam Scott, but he later decided to alter this because he wanted to be known as Dred. Scott gave up the name Sam because he wanted to honor his brother, Dred, who passed away early in life. It was a way of honoring his family. Dred Scott was born into slavery, as both of his parents were slaves. It is unclear who the Scotts belonged to at the time of Dred Scott's birth, but they were eventually sold to Peter Blow and moved to St. Louis, Missouri. It wasn't long before the family was sold again, this time to Dr. John Emerson, a physician in the U.S. Army. In 1836, Dred Scott married Harriet Robinson. They would go on to have 4 children together. Daughters Eliza and Lizzie would survive the horrors of slavery. However, their 2 sons both died in their infant years. Their love for each other helped them fight through the many trials and tribulations that life had in store for the Scott family. The Dred Scott case actually started long before it ever saw the walls of a courtroom. The case originated when Dr. Emerson, the Scott's legal owner, traveled to Illinois as an obligation of his service in the U.S. Army. He often brought Dred and Harriet Scott along for the travels. A couple years later, Emerson settled in Missouri, a state where slavery was legal. Dr. Emerson died in 1843 and left his wife Irene to manage the slaves for the time being. The Scotts attempted to buy their own freedom, but they were denied. It became obvious that their only recourse would be the court system. The issue of freedom arose because Illinois was a free state where slavery was not allowed to exist. The Scotts felt that their travels to a free state thus ended their status as slaves. They should have been allowed to walk away from the situation under the protection of Illinois law. However, since they waited to file the case until they were back in St. Louis, they would have to file the case in Missouri. Their first attempt ended in a retrial. However, in 1850, a jury in Missouri found that Dred Scott and his wife Harriet had been illegally kept in slavery. The victory did not last long, because in 1852, the Missouri Supreme Court overturned the decision, saying access to free land did not mean freedom for slaves. The case took an odd turn in 1852 when the Scotts launched another effort to earn their freedom, this time by challenging John A. Sanford in federal court. As the brother-in-law of Dr. John Emerson, he was in fact the legal owner of the Scott family and not Irene Emerson. Scott and his lawyers challenged Sanford in another federal court, where again they were defeated. Left with no other option, Dred and Harriet took the case to the United States Supreme Court in the landmark case of Dred Scott v. Sanford. The result of the case would go far beyond anything the people involved would have ever imagined. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney wrote the ruling on behalf of the majority of the United States Supreme Court. They found that Dred and Harriet Scott should not have been allowed to file a lawsuit with the courts because they were not citizens of the United States. In fact, the ruling went on to classify all Africans living in America as property. And, since the government cannot take property from someone when traveling to another state, they could not free a slave under the same scenario. If that wasn't enough on its own, the court also ruled that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional, thus legalizing the act of slavery in territories where slaves had found freedom. This was the last legal effort that the Scots mounted in an attempt to gain freedom from the bonds of slavery. The nation, however, was one step closer to war. Dred Scott and his family remained slaves for a brief period of time following the Supreme Court ruling. The Scott family was eventually purchased by previous owners, the Blow family, and on May 26, 1857, Dred, Harriet, Eliza, and Lizzie Scott were set free. Their tenure as slaves had ended. Dred and his family settled in St. Louis, where Dred took up a part-time job as a porter. Sadly enough, Dred passed away in September of that same year after a battle with tuberculosis. He never lived to see the end of the Civil War or the end of slavery in America. There is no doubt that his memory was present when the United States passed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution. His family lived on long after Dred's passing, with his wife surviving nearly 20 years and his daughters even more. Dred Scott was a man who lived his entire life as a slave. He only tasted freedom for a short period of time. However, his story would go on to play an important role in inspiring the actions of major historical figures, including Frederick Douglass and President Abraham Lincoln. In 1997, a memorial was created to honor the story of Dred Scott. That memorial was placed on the grounds of the old courthouse in St. Louis, Missouri, a place where the efforts will always be remembered.
All persons held as slaves within any state, the people of which shall then be in rebellion against the United States, shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. Now the fate of the Union and the fate of slavery were one and the same.